Is it true that by the time we feel like we're making a decision, our brain's already chosen for us?
It's true that a lot of stuff's automatic, and that's an advantage. This army of different parts all working together to generate coherent behavior, make it possible for you to survive in a complex world. But lots of times, that huge chunk of decision-making architecture comes to some decision back here, and by the time the part of me that's talking to you finds out about it, it's already happened. What's the cost? Cost is we're quite imperfect. What we do with what we have is just incredible. You just have to decide that that's the right word, decide that that's so important to you that you're going to de-automatize it.
Paul, welcome to Decisions That Count.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be here.
You're in New York.
We're in New York. Shawn's fangirling. This is, I cannot tell you how excited he's been, just even to get a response from you, honestly.
To get scientists to go on podcasts is notoriously difficult. So I sent you the email, to be honest. I'm like, I don't know.
Gosh, I mean, I think that's part of my job, right? I mean, the public pays for our work. The American people are committed, I think, to what we do and the advances that we can make in medicine and in the economy, things like that. If I don't pay them back by telling you guys what I do, I'm not doing my job.
I literally just talked about this. I'm like, we were just having a discussion. I'm saying, why isn't it in the mandate for professors to communicate more with the public?
No, I think it is in the mandate for professors to communicate with more, but it's hard. It's a different skill. Professors aren't actually trained to do this, and they're not selected for this. Sometimes I worry that they're selected to be inscrutable to the public. And so there just aren't as many professors who are good at it as there should be.
Yeah. So thank you for coming on the show. You're a leader in a field that I think is so cool. And because I think modern science is so exciting for me, because when I was doing my program, you're very much in a lane. So I was like an electrophysiologist, synaptic, and that's what I did. You rarely saw translational stuff come together, but you're bringing together neuroscience, pretty hardcore neuroscience, economics, and psychology, right?
I'm somebody who gets bored very easily.
It's going to be a really cool discussion around decisions. Very excited for the podcast today.
Okay, let's get into it with the first question. Is it true that by the time we feel like we're making a decision, our brain's already chosen for us?
I love that observation, and it's obviously true. But I want to sort of challenge our notion of what's us. You know, when you say like, that decision was already made before I knew about it, who was that decision made by? I mean, it was made by you. It's just not the part of you that's having a conversation right now around this table. You know, your brain is tens of billions of neurons. They're distributed in things like nuclei that control our breathing. You're breathing. I mean, I'm not aware of it right now. I'm pacing my breathing to exactly match my cadence of speech. I'm doing that. Now, I hear that if you said, Paul, could you please explain to me how you pace your cadence of breathing? I could not answer that question. But really what that speaks to is that the part of us that's talking with each other really has access to only a very small part of our brain. But I'm just challenging a little bit because I always want to see the glass as more full than empty. I want to say it's absolutely true that the part of me that's talking to you right now is only a little part of me. But the rest is me. It's just not the part that talks very well. So it's true, I think, that lots of the hardware in my head is making decisions every moment.
Mm-hmm.
And once in a while, those decisions are very verbal. They're very symbolic. And I have access to when they happen. But lots of times, that huge chunk of decision-making architecture comes to some decision back here. And by the time the part of me that's talking to you finds out about it, it's already happened. That happens all the time. And it's a little weird because you have to then start to think of yourself not just as the part of you that talks, but as this army of different parts all working together to generate coherent behavior, make it possible for you to survive in a complex world. And one little piece of it, the tip of the iceberg, is the part that's having this interview right now. So I'm sort of pushing you to think of yourself as more, not less. There's a temptation to say, oh gosh, somebody else in my head made that decision. And I don't want you to think about yourself that way. I want to think about yourself as much more than the tip of the iceberg that's having this conversation. An army of other pieces that are helping us, that are really important to us, that keep us alive, that keep us safe, that make us dodge the cars in New York City when we're crossing a busy street. All that automatic stuff, that's not other. That's the most important part, keeping me safe. And when I'm talking to you, I know I've got all that in my head taking care of me.
That's quite hard when we want to feel like we've got control over our decisions.
I agree with you, Michelle. It's like I want to have the illusion that I can explain everything I do. And as a neuroscientist, I'm happy to give up that illusion. There are some things that I do. Like if you ask me about a stock pick, probably I can explain to you why I picked it. And probably I satisfy myself that I really understand it before I do it. And that's all about the talking me. But I really don't think about it as loss of control. Think about it as not being aware of stuff that's not important. And for the most part, that frees the part that's aware to do the really interesting things. I really want to push you away from, I want the illusion of control. You do have control. But it's true that a lot of stuff's automatic. And that's an advantage. It's not a disadvantage. And if you practice enough, you can get control of those things too. You just have to decide that that's the right word, decide that that's so important to you that you're going to de-automatize it.
Quite often when we talk in this podcast, we get a ton of questions about the brain and whatnot. And I always go back to like some of the problems we're experiencing in individually, communities, societies or whatnot can be, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is like it's the evolutionary mismatch. So 99% of human history was on the savannah, and that's how our brain was designed for. And now we're dodging cars in New York, which we just did a couple hours ago. There's horns and there's stress, and we used to get a stress response when a tiger jumped at us, but now we're getting it on the drive to our boss's office, sort of thing. But all that automatic stuff you talked about is kind of like our the climate or the foundations of our decision making to some degree. And I think the good news of what you spoke to is there's ways to control that as well, to develop it, to think it, to make sure it's not something, I guess my point is, it's not something that is malleable. It's something that can constantly be changed.
Why is it that we struggle and often do weird things? And the way I think about this is we are not, digital computers. Digital computers would not make this mistake, right? Digital computers would be gathering all this data, weighing it optimally, making a decision. And we see that all the time. Think about the large language models that we're seeing emerge over the last few years. But let me pause and remind you that we are each carrying around about a 10-watt computer. Amazon and Google are now building these language models that are terawatt computers. So we're a very different kind of machine. We're really focused on the idea, how can I do more with less? I mean, if you wanted just to increase our informational capacity by a factor of 10, that's not a lot. That's still, then what would we be? We'd be a 100-watt computer. So what? Your brain would weigh 53 pounds. You would have to carry it around in a little cart behind you. And you would have to eat 3 times as much food every day. Now, that's interesting. But think about that. Well, let's first think about that on the savannah. That's a lose. I mean, yeah, it's true you would do a little better avoiding tigers and picking the best nut to eat. But like you'd have to eat 3 times as much to do a little bit better. It'd just be uneconomical. Mm-hmm. And you'd be dragging this giant head around. We have very limited capacity. And it's true that we make mistakes because we have limited capacity. But oh my gosh, how efficient we are. You give me a couple of sandwiches and I can solve calculus problems for you. You give ChatGPT a couple of nuclear reactors and it can solve calculus problems for you. So that's the difference. What's the cost? The cost is we're quite imperfect. But what we do with what we have is just incredible. I mean, it's true we make mistakes and we should talk about why and where the errors are. And there are lots of great strategies for avoiding them that harness the power of our architecture. But I always want to start by sort of planting that flag, which is, if you had to run on corned beef sandwiches, we're the best game in town.
We've got so many questions. I just don't know where to take it with you.
I'm going to get distracted, and I know we want to talk about decisions and neuroeconomics. Maybe we can go there. I don't think most people won't have heard of this before. Can you kind of give us a background to it, and how it came to be in a general sense, and then we'll dive deep into the physiology.
Lots of people over the course of human history have studied how people make decisions. It shouldn't come as a huge surprise. Probably the first people to think about it were philosophers in ancient Greece. economists starting in the 16 and 1700s started to write mathematical models of how people make decisions. In the last 200 years, psychologists have thought a lot about how people make decisions. And in the last 50 years, 40 years, neurobiologists have started to think about how decisions happen actually in the brain. A thing that was extremely disappointing to me as a young neuroscientist 30, 40 years ago was none of these groups talked to each other. You met an economist, you said, how's decision-making work? And they started writing equations for you on a piece of paper. You asked a psychologist, how do decisions work? And they started telling you about, like, how people think about things. Like, what's in my mind? What do I want? You asked a neurobiologist and they start talking about neurons and action potentials. And if you stopped any one of them and you said, what about those other guys? They say, oh, it's not.
They don't know what they're doing.
They don't know what they're doing. Rick Charnov, who's sort of the dean of foraging theory, said to me, Paul, you got to become an economist. And I was like, oh my God, that's so horrible. He said, but you don't have the whole story unless you have everything. And so I dragged myself through economics training, and that allowed me to see places where individual disciplines had failed. There were sort of gaps. And if you could put the pieces together like a giant puzzle, that you could see a lot more. I think we know a lot more about decision making because we've put together all these different viewpoints on how decisions happen.
So when we know this part of the brain, right, that values decisions.
Many parts.
Okay.
And some are where we, in the part of the brain called the striatum, which of course, Shawn, you know about, that's where our habits live. And if I'm going to do something and I want to automatize it, make it fast, make it reliable, not want to be able to not want to have to burn much energy to do it, want it to be really quick, I burn that habit into my striatum. And that's the source of addictions. That's where addictions come from. That very adaptive circuit being sort of hijacked by addictive substances. If I want to make a really hard stock trade, that's a very frontal cortical thing. And it's a different set of modules, but then they all converge on the final decision-making circuitry. We know where that is. And what we see, that kind of one of the interesting stories is we have lots of different parts of our brain for valuing lots of different things. Some are automatic, some are very deliberate. And then they all converge on a common circuit for that make the decision part. Something I hear all the time is, you can't compare apples and oranges. And when people say this to me, I want to say, do you go to the market much? Like, you do actually go to the market and you do actually decide how many apples and oranges to buy. Everyone does that. And what that implies is that somewhere apples and oranges have to converge so they can be compared. And so that comparison process is pretty localized. It's a place where representations of value have to compete. And it happens at different levels of the brain. So there are more automatic places where it happens and more deliberate places where it happens. But I guess the story I'd tell you is that decision making is very distributed. We understand that distribution pretty well at this point. And we can train ourselves to be operating more in the automatic places or more in the really, really slow conscious places. But you always see the options come together and they always kind of fight it out for control of the neural circuit that's actually going to control your behavior. And then to Michelle's point, sometimes that convergence happens at a level of the brain you don't have conscious access to. And sometimes it happens at a level of the conscious brain. And don't see that as a bad thing. See that as a good thing.
I've got a question. So why do we sometimes make decisions that we instantly regret? And I'm going to give like an example. So I value health and fitness. I value body composition and how I look. Those core values. I've already pre-made the decision that I'm going to eat healthy. I'm not going to eat junk food. I have got swept up in New York. I've walked past this shop. I've been lured in. And next thing I know, I've got a donut in my hand. And I'm like, why did I just buy this? Like, why? I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD. I'm 39 years old. And it's very, very new, Paul. Like, I'm still trying to kind of understand. But I'm questioning everything. So now I'm like, oh, well, did I just get that donut because my impulse control is so poor that I've like made that decision without thinking about it? And maybe if I'd have taken like a little bit more time, was that the ADHD that has driven me to do that? Or if I've just interrupted someone, is that my ADHD? Is that my impulse control? And so now I'm in that process of trying to process everything, but also I'm questioning everything.
One of the things that we want to be aware of is that people have a range of different characteristics. as decision makers. That's good for our species, right? And so when we think about the autism spectrum, I mean, there's a lot of talk about autism is terrible, autism's only bad. And, that's just so rude and not appropriate. Autism is this huge spectrum that produces a range of different classes of behavior, which makes us more robust as a species. And the same is true for ADHD. I mean, some people have more impulse control, some people have less. There are environments in which people with less impulse control wipe the table with their opponents. There are other places where more impulse control is an advantage. So I know we now diagnose people. I think of this as more kind of defining people. And so, yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm totally comfortable with the idea that you and I might have different levels of self-control, and there are environments in which you'll do better and there are environments in which I'll do better. And by deciding together as a team, we'll do even better. So first I want to just, tone down is that my disorder? It's your personality. And yes, we have a name for that in medicine, and that's fine.
Yeah.
At the extreme tails of the distribution, of course, these are problems. People who have zero impulse control struggle in life. And people who are unable to make decisions at the other end of the spectrum, who are so cautious that they miss opportunities every day. These are also real problems. So like any set of characteristics, it's the people at the edges that we have to worry about as a community. But Michelle, being in somewhere to the left of center, so what? Then we get to this question of how much impulse control is the right impulse control. And, you've heard kind of my answer. It depends on the circumstance we're in. And so I really hate I don't mind the medicalization of it. I'm a biologist, but I hate the pathologizing of it. That's too much.
I have to say that I just love what you've just said there. And there's like a sense of relief. And in the research that I've done, I'm seeing it more as a trait. And to be honest, without even knowing it, I've managed to build systems to capitalize on it and use it to my advantage without even knowing that I had it. And I think as I go through processing it, I will question. I think I'm just trying to understand it in myself now. And I think I'll then question it less and less.
But I also think, we keep having this coming back to how do I use the different modules in my brain in a good and efficient way? And I hear you, Michelle, saying sometimes I go with that and sometimes I don't. And I mean, I'm a little more self-controlling and a little more cautious, less as I get older, oddly. But there are times when I just think, you just have to go with it. Like, I have to not rethink this. And that's hard for me, but I do it. And so, I just have the complementary problem to you.
You ride a motorcycle in New York, so I don't know how cautious.
Shawn's got love in his eyes. He's like, you're the coolest scientist I've ever met.
Scientist rides a motorcycle.
It's like goals.
Well, if you sat in traffic in New York long enough.
Fair. Yeah.
Sorry, just one more question before Shawn gets back into the science. Can we override those unconscious decisions?
Sometimes.
Or rewire them?
Yeah, I mean, okay, those were separate questions.
Sorry.
No, and they're both good. So rewire, the answer is surely yes. Everyone knows this. If you're learning to play the saxophone over the course of practicing, your brain is rewired. We know where that happens. We know how it happens. And decisions that were hard to make, which finger to move and in what way, become completely automatic. Can we do that with other stuff? Absolutely. I mean, with enough practice, we can rewire almost anything. That's one of the great powers of our plasticity, our ability to rewire our own brains. So yeah, I think anything practiced hard enough, with maybe some few exceptions, is rewirable and fully modifiable. The first question you asked me was, can I just think about it and make it go away? Yeah, probably not most of the time. I mean, we do come to any problem as articulated, complicated, rich decision makers. We have answers to problems that people ask us. Oftentimes you can point out to someone that was a bad choice. This is the job of parents with their children. And when we're doing that, we're rewiring our children. We don't expect them the very next time they face that problem to necessarily get it right. But we do expect that after, 10 years with us, they'll do a better job. The answer to the first question is no. The answer to the second question is, but yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So back to like decisions, because I think one of the reasons why we started this podcast too is people don't think about their decisions enough. We like jump to action. We don't cover the step before it, right? I think we make the assumption that our decision capacities are always the same. So my ability to make those logical decisions and value correctly in the morning is going to be the same in the afternoon, or after bad sleep, it's the same as not a bad sleep, or whatnot. So maybe like how does the background state or physiology or sleep affect our decision making? And is that something people should be aware of? Is the state they're in when they're making important decisions?
I mean, I'm saying something that we don't understand very well, which is, why is it that if I have to make 1,000 decisions, then I would say as a scientist, the stochasticity or the noisiness or the imperfection of those decisions, why is that growing? There have been a lot of interesting theories about why that happens. And honestly, they're not great. Sleep is a little bit easier because we now understand that sleep plays a really key role in reducing noise in the brain. We clean out a lot of junk when we're asleep, both informational junk and literal physical cellular junk that accumulates between nerve cells, which gets kind of washed out during sleep. So we know a lot about how sleep improves the operational performance of the nervous system, reduces noise, improves decisional accuracy. That stuff's, I wouldn't say we know everything about that, but we have kind of 3 or 4 really good leads, and they all look really interesting. The thing that we don't really understand very well is decision fatigue. And I know you've been chasing this for a while. I'd love to tell you that I have clean evidence that over the course of the first 100 decisions, some neuron gets tired and it doesn't fire as well. But that has just not turned out to be true. There have been, and I'm sure you guys have chased this down again and again, there have been, 5 really good theories about why we experience fatigue for decisions. And for the most part, they have not worked out. The neuroscience, every time we dig in, it's like, well, no, the neurons over the course of an hour of decision making, they look pretty much the same that they looked in the beginning. And people are telling you, wow, but I just can't make another decision. Paul, you're the neuroscientist. Tell me why. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we know the answer to that question. One of the very popular theories, which you and I talked about earlier, is the idea that we get depleted of glucose. Mm. And that theory, seemed exciting for a minute. And every time anyone's checked it, it just doesn't work. Maybe I'll answer, and maybe this will cut in well in a moment. One of the things we do know is that when you're hungry and you're really glucose depleted, that is terrible for your neurons. They get noisy, their firing rates go to pieces. If you're hungry enough, noise goes up. And there's been some really fabulous studies of this. A neurobiologist I love by the name of Nathalie Rochefort, Professor Rochefort has done these incredible studies where she takes mice and she has them either in a really hungry state, it's a little bit mean, or in a really well-fed state. And she shows that when they're in this really hungry state, they retune their neurons to use less glucose. And as a result, they get much, much noisier and more unpredictable. And the neurons do a crappier job, but they do it for less energy.
Right.
That's a really cool result. And as soon as you feed them up, the neurons start gorging on glucose. They become much more efficient. They start spending more glucose to make their decisions, and spending more glucose to make their decisions makes them much more efficient, much more accurate in their decision making. So this idea that in response to being basically starved, it's not quite what happens in that experiment, but that's kind of the concept. You just tune your neurons down to use less and less resources, and the result is they get crappier and crappier. But they're doing the right thing. Yeah. They're making the best with what they have, and you can dial them up to be more accurate. These are really, really interesting ideas. That's the extreme case. That doesn't happen in an hour. I've just had my pastrami sandwich. You ask me to make 1,000 decisions. At the end of the 1,000 decisions, an hour later, I'm still got plenty of pastrami sandwich in my tummy, and I don't have an answer for you, but I know I am doing a bad job. That's the one that's hard.
Yeah.
So sleep, we kind of get real glucose deprivation, like you're really starving. We're starting to get, but that's kind of not our, the story we really want, which is why is it that if after I've been at the market for half an hour and I get to the aisle with the Fruit Loop cereals for my kids, and at this moment, I'm going to make a bunch of really terrible decisions because I just can't. Whatever, just take it. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, this is why like decision fatigue is just so fascinating for me because, like, as you know, it started more psychology, and now we're just really getting to the physiology. Which you're right, we don't have the answers yet, but this is just so fascinating. And in our work, we've talked to folks from probably thousands of folks now, but like it's so context dependent. So some people are like, wow, you've made thousands, you should definitely have it, and they're fine. Whereas other people within an hour, they're suffering from, and you can see it in like a study for loan application officers, and they start to suffer from a condition where they're rejecting more than they should and things like that. And yeah, maybe just to highlight because the energy thing I think is important, just because in popular science, I think it's gone off track a lot, that people seem to think your brain can be starved from energy at 2 p.m. and you're lacking that's not how it works, right? Like, it's only extreme circuit. Like your body will do everything it can to make sure your brain has enough energy. To the nitty gritty, not to go too science though, but the part to me, like that energy component is interesting because like neurons demand a massive amount of energy. We know that. And there's so many feedback cycles that are happening to make sure that operations continue as much as possible to what you said. So even in situations of great deprivation or maybe decision fatigue where a network is suffering, your brain will automatically switch to other things, right? It's still going to probably make a decision. It may not be the optimal decision, but it seems like making any decision may be better than no decision at all, I suppose.
I mean, I think the place where that makes sense to me is this: I am generally deprived of glucose and I am, tired, and my neuronal efficiency is dropping, and we can see that. Mm-hmm. And I'm making the best with what I have. That, I kind of understand all of that. I give you a sugary beverage, you drink it, that's plenty to power your brain for the next 2-3 hours. I'm measuring your blood glucose. It's not budging, and you are cross-eyed and unable to make a decision. That's the one we still don't really understand.
One thing that I've done in my own life, and I credit all the idea to Michelle though too, is we've just with decision fatigue is what, Michelle had this great idea. It's no longer a to-do list. It's a decision list. Because if decision fatigue, however, we don't know how it's happening, we know it occurred likely. So she started to prioritize her day with the most important decisions first. Whereas before we would default to I'm going to get all the boring stuff over and, all this work I'm going to get done. So the afternoon I can make my big decisions, right? To give my brain space. Do you think that's probably...
Don't do that.
There's important decisions in the morning. But also just kind of quantify that is that, or to clarify that is, I also look at the work that I've got to do. And I'm like, is that a decision heavy piece of work? So an example will be, as a marketer, I will have to do a communications plan. And a communications plan is where I'm looking at the different audience cohorts, and I'm looking at all of the different moments that I'm going to reach that audience and what my messaging is going to be at those various points. I'm making, hundreds, if not thousands of micro decisions, in every communication plan. If I do that first thing in the morning, I'm more likely to make different decisions, make better decisions and more interesting decisions. I'm likely to be more creative. I'm likely to make the messaging a little bit more bespoke and different for each of those audiences. I'm going to be thinking more about those audiences' needs, wants.
I'm just hearing how much higher capacity you are at that time.
You have no idea.
Yeah. But then in the afternoon, I will tend to just default to, I might just copy and paste a plan that I've done before, and then make a few tweaks. I might just kind of default to, okay, well, I know that messaging them on Facebook, this type of things worked before, versus in the morning, I might be kind of more creative with the messaging. So since working with Shawn, I've been looking at what I call kind of the decision load of a piece of work, and then trying to say, okay, well, that is actually a decision heavy piece of work. I'm going to put that in the morning, and maybe I'm going to do my catch up calls, more kind of social meets in the afternoon.
So I would add one caveat, which is, I can already tell you're a morning person.
Oh, yeah.
And I have to admit, as am I, the hardest problems I have to solve as a scientist are always put in my, I get to work and I put the sign outside my door that says, nobody touch this door, and 2 hours and I can really get something done. But everybody's different. And so we want to think that there's kind of an arc of efficiency, or arc of creativity, or arc of capacity is probably the right word. Mm-hmm. And for you and I, that's in the morning. It might not be true for everybody, but knowing when that is important, and making sure that you put the hard stuff there, that's definitely the right choice. I mean, I think anytime you meet a successful person, they have learned that.
Optimize. Yeah. And I think it's just being aware that like the quality of your decisions can decline. It's not mental energy so much as like, oh, I'm feeling tired. It's just like your decision capacity can actually change. Most people don't think about that.
And it changes over the lifespan. That's really important to remember. For adolescents, first thing in the morning is not the best time.
Despite schooling for generations.
Yeah, right. And indeed, and lots of schools are now engaging in this fact. And, my youngest, who's in high school, his high school starts at 9:00. And my eldest, who's 10 years older and now a graduate student, when he was in school just 10 years ago, school started at 7:30. And you can see the difference. It's also true that across the lifespan, these things change. And so you want to be sensitive to the fact that the time that's best for you and I is definitely not the time that's best for a 14-year-old.
How does, let's call it wisdom, affect your decision making? And I say that because decisions I would have agonized over even 5 years ago, now I make without thinking about it because of experience and age, wisdom, knowledge.
I think I have to answer this one as an economist, not as a neuroscientist, because I don't have a lot of neuroscience answer for this question. I would say that there are two aspects here that happen as we age. And we know a little bit about the psychology of neuroscience. One is we just get a lot more data. I mean, the amount of stuff I know today compared to the amount of stuff that I knew. And if you ask me a question, I can say, I've faced something. I kind of faced that decision 50 times. And three of them went great and 20 of them went really badly. And that's information either intuitively or explicitly and cognitively I can access. And so think about, one way to think about wisdom is to think about, I just have more information. The second way to think about it is, and it's almost like habits, over the course of the lifespan, I had a lot of training in making decisions, and I've had a lot of positive and negative reinforcement in making decisions. And so it's not just that I have more information, but that I've sort of trained up these networks, learned which networks work well for me. We talked about the many different networks interacting to generate a decision, learning how to use some and suppress others. That's something that we're also doing as we're training over the course of our lifespan. This is sometimes the difference thought of in psychology circles as the difference between fluid and crystallized intelligence. Younger people are actually faster, better general purpose decision makers, but they have less data. And as you cross 35, 40, the bad news is your fluid intelligence starts to decline. I mean, this is really terrible, and people my age are not yet staring down the throat of the worst of it, but I can already notice it. And so I'm depending more and more on crystallized intelligence as I'm aging. But the crystallized intelligence, is an asset in many circumstances, particularly the ones I'm well trained in. So I think that what we should imagine is that across the lifespan, as we're moving towards our mid-30s, early 40s, when I speak to corporate audiences, I always talk about this. Those are people who can face novel situations most efficiently. And as we're thinking about decision makers in their 50s and 60s, those are decision makers who can face situations in which they have experience most efficiently. And so that's really, I always say this to CEOs, like CEOs tend to be in the fully crystallized state of life. And I always say, don't be embarrassed by that. Like, that's not a bug. There are some things you're going to be really good at and some things you're not. And if it is a dynamic, completely unanticipated new circumstance that you've never seen, get a younger colleague, ask them what they think. Don't be embarrassed. You're really good at something. They're really good at something else. Use that complementarity in an efficient way.
Great advice.
I think you're talking to a lot of people there, just with everything that's how quickly the world's changing with AI. Let's take that as an example.
The CEOs.
Yeah.
We had a guest on who struggled with the AI who real difficult challenge with senior leadership. Yeah. I think it's a great piece of advice though. Yeah.
I mean, this idea that we're all static in our lifespan, and I'm the CEO, and so I have all the capabilities my younger people had and more. It's just not true. You have a different set of capabilities. They make you stronger in some areas and weaker in others. And the more you realize that, the better a decision maker you'll be.
I want to touch on one piece of science too before. Okay. So just because I started my career and my first company is more dementia, Alzheimer's related. That's what my original training was looking basically at excitotoxic injury. So for our listeners, it's at some point your neurons can talk to a way and too often too much that the cell can become injured, and it's one of many underlying theories of different dementias. All to say, like, I was looking at how synapses communicate. If decision fatigue is physiological, which I think we can agree it is.
Has to be. What else could it be?
And we call the noise increasing. My question with all this is twofold. I want to get your thoughts on. So one, what would chronic decision fatigue do to the brain potentially? Because if it's a modern epidemic, what do you think, or is there a trouble with making those synapses strained consistently for days or months or weeks? Second question is, given children, there's this huge process of synaptic pruning and neuronal pruning where you have the most neurons when you're 2 or 4, I think. I forget the number, 3. And then your brain starts to bring down that efficiency based on how the network's being used, right? But now we may be causing dramatic changes in network functionality or synaptic functionality. Would that affect, like, I'm thinking kids on social media making thousands of decisions from a not psychology, physiologically, will that affect the process of pruning? So two questions there. Enlighten me.
The second one's so scary.
I have 2 young kids, by the way, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So it keeps me up at night.
6.
Yeah.
So mine are 26 to 16. So a little later. Okay. This is such a hard question, Shawn. Okay. Let's do the first one, which is kind of the less interesting question in a way. And that is, during decision fatigue, do we have evidence that we can see toxicity occurring in the nervous system? Mm-hmm. The answer is no, we do not have evidence for that. It's a really interesting hypothesis, and we just don't know. And I love the idea of chasing that down. We do know that during an epileptic seizure, where neurons are firing madly, we can see all kinds of, as you probably know, excitotoxic damage. Neurons start to kill each other off, and that's in a stroke. A lot of the injury from the stroke comes after the stroke, and you bring back blood into the tissue, and the neurons are primed by the stroke in a very bad way, and they kill each other off in huge numbers. And so we do know that that happens. Do we know if that's a marker of decision fatigue? No idea. So the second question you asked me, which is so interesting, is our brains are tuned by the environments we live in. When I was growing up, there was a very old tradition, which when you looked at the brain, you said, is that nature or is that nurture? Mm. And the idea was that some feature of the brain was either specified uniquely by the genome, and it just was something we inherited, or it was specified by the environment and our teachers and our parents, and it was something we learned. And in the last 20 years, that distinction has really evaporated for neuroscientists. The genome creates a very, very flexible device that interacts with the environment. And the machine you get out in an adult isn't just genetics or environment. Genetics is a tool that biology created, that evolution created to fabricate a brain well suited to the environment in which you live. They're inseparable. The trick of the genome is that it uses the environment to make you. And so when we say, are you the genome? Are you the environment? Are you nature? Are you nurture? The answer is no. Nature uses the environment to create through nurture who we are. They're inseparable qualities. But that does mean that brains change when environments change. Now, one place that's been beautifully studied, and this is really going to be the hint of the answer to your question, and not a happy one, is literacy. Mm-hmm. So really one of the most important cognitive neuroscientists in Europe, a guy by the name of Stan Dehaene. Stan really made his mark in Paris studying what happens when people learn to read. I know that kids take a long time to learn to read. It's not something you can just tell a kid to do. And it's not something you can tell an adult to do, right? If you take an illiterate adult who's, let's say, immigrated from a fourth world country to a first world country and they want to learn to read and they sit down and they start learning to read, it takes 3 years, just like it takes with a kid. So that's pretty interesting. They're doing something physiologically to their brain. And Stan has studied people in the brain scanner while they're undergoing this process. And one of the things, Stan, I think the signature most amazing thing is there's a little patch of brain, on this side, on the left side, where your brain, right at the border between your visual brain and your auditory brain. And this chunk of brain in an illiterate person is specialized for very elaborate shape categorization. And it doesn't react to auditory input sounds in any way. And over the course of learning to read, this little part of your visual brain completely rewires itself. It locks into the auditory part of your brain. They begin to communicate frantically with each other. New neuron connections emerge. And by the time you've learned to read, it is a letter reading area. And it's this chunk of your brain that probably does something really important when you don't read, but that is co-opted and rebuilt and turned into the reading area. I think that's a really beautiful story. And that you can do it as an adult is really, really reassuring to me. But here we're seeing a complete rewiring of a significant module of the brain, and it's being diverted from its original need that it served to this new need that it can serve. And it happens to be right here because it's at the border of auditory. The cat had a ball, and visual, the cat had a ball. And it's not surprising that it lives right there because it had to live right there. So that's cool. We know that if we introduced a new technology like reading, it would rewire our brains. And we all take it for granted because all of us in the first world have been rewired. And we spent a ton of time in school getting that rewiring done.
Yeah.
Do I think that if we created a new technology called a smartphone, in which visual and auditory discriminations have to happen with lightning speed, and it consumes 20% of our waking time, this is completely rewiring the brain? Of course it is. Now, I mean, if you wanted to be glass half full and you were a social media entrepreneur, the fact that you were rewiring everyone's brain, at least all the young people's brains, so that they could work with your device better, you might see that as a positive thing. If I try to stretch and think, well, maybe it is positive because maybe my kids have to live in a world where those kinds of decisions are going to be so important for them. Maybe that's good. You're hearing hesitancy.
Stretching.
I'm just worrying about the parts of the brain.
Part.
Yeah. I'm worrying about the parts of the brain. You know, it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
The skull's not going to get any bigger. We're stuck with 10 watts of computational power. When we learned to read, we lost something.
Yeah.
Now, I probably, lost the ability to tell good deadly from good fruit or something like that. But that's okay. I buy my fruit in the supermarket, and reading's pretty valuable. Mm-hmm. So maybe the optimist in me is, I don't know what we're giving up, what my kids are giving up. They're giving up something.
Yeah.
And that new hardware, maybe it's really valuable.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not.
Great way to look at it. It is fascinating. Yeah. I like the optimism part though. That's good. Yeah. You're trying hard
on that one.
Fascinating.
No, I love that. Right. I've got one more question for you. Okay.
I think the bottom.
The last one.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you could whisper one truth into the ear of everybody listening, something that would make their daily decisions feel lighter and maybe more hopeful, what would it be?
The thing I would say is, we are not busted creatures who make bad decisions. We get told that all the time. We are miraculous devices that at 100 billionth the power that's being deployed into ChatGPT can compete with ChatGPT. And it's true that we have capacity limits. And it's true that those capacity limits are frustrating. And I feel that frustration. But it is a miracle how incredible we are and how much we get done with the capacity we have. And if I had to choose between having a 53-pound brain and having to eat 3 times as much food to just do a little bit better at those decisions that frustrate me, that would not be a better life. We are the most extraordinary computers in the history, as far as we know, of the universe, certainly of our corner of the universe. And we get confused about this all the time because we see ChatGPT never make a mistake. Well, ChatGPT makes mistakes all the time, but we see big computers not make mistakes that use megawatts of power. And we feel bad about the donut that we ate. And I understand all of that, and I am filled with regret for bad decisions I have made. But we're amazing machines. And what we accomplish with what we have makes us just the most efficient decision makers that have ever been.
I love that so much. I'm an optimist too. So
It's great. Yeah, definitely. I need to be more optimistic, I think.
Paul, thank you so much for coming on Decisions That Count.
My pleasure.
It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
So all of our listeners, we'll link to Paul's profile below. If you've got any questions, please ask them in the comments and we'll get some answers. Our mission is to reignite a generation's belief in the power of their decisions. I feel that so many of us feel powerless at the moment. You know, so many decisions being made on our behalf that we don't always agree with. But every decision that you make has an impact, no matter how small. We hope you've taken a lot, as much as I have, from this episode. So as always, make every decision count, and we'll see you next week. Bye.